Hey up now then, how you doing? And welcome back to the Yorkshire Bike Mechanics YouTube channel. My name's Dave K. I hope you're having a good week. And if this is your first time watching us, then thank you, welcome. I hope you enjoy what we do. If you already subscribe and you're a regular customer, then hello again. I hope you're good. This week in the workshop we have a fantastic Bianchi or Bianchi, whichever way you want to pronounce it, e-bike. This is a t-tronic e-bike. Now you probably know that Bianchi or Bianchi is synonymous with road bikes, and you've probably seen loads of them. If you watch Tour de France or if you watch Tour of Britain, then you'll see a lot of the top riders that do ride Bianchi road bikes. And you wouldn't have thought they'd actually start making e-bikes. Well, this is an e-bike. It's a nice one, and we're going to show you around it. It's in for a first service, so we're going to go through it. Let's crack on. So here she is, a lovely Bianchi e-bike in customary Bianchi colours. This one's got a new Shimano ep-8 motor in there. It's all singing, all dancing. It's 12-speed Shimano setup. And the first thing that we need to do, like I say, it's in for a first service, so the first thing that we need to do is dig this little bad boy out here. So this is his chain checking tool. This tells us what sort of condition the chain's in, which it gives us an indication as what the rest of the drivetrain's like as well. So let's drop this in the chain and we'll see where we are. Right, okay, so it's currently at 0.75, which is a good indication that we need to change this chain. So from the wear that we're seeing on this particular chain, you would expect a little bit less wear than that on a fairly new bike, but we've got to take things into consideration, like this bike might have been brand new to a brand new e-bike owner, and it does take quite a few months to actually get used to an e-bike, so you would expect more wear on the running gear from a new e-bike owner, from someone who's used to riding one and can get used to how to get the best out of the running gear and make it last a lot longer. So with that, let's have a look at the mileage. Let's see how many miles this bike's done, and that'll be a good indication of what sort of riding this customer's done. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so we've got 299.7 miles currently on this bike, which isn't a right lot, admitted, but again, like I said before, it could be that this bike is new, is a new bike to a new owner. So, but nevertheless, whatever the mileage says, we know what the chain checking tool says, and we're definitely going to need a new chain on this bike. So let's have a look at the rest of it. So again, we're grabbing hold of the back wheel and we're just moving it from side to side to see if we can actually get any movement there, and there's none there at all. The bearings feel nice, there's no movement in there at all. We'll have a look at the brake pads. I don't know whether you can see down there, but there is a little bit of wear on the brake pads, not too much. So I think they're all right for now, but we need to advise him to keep an eye on those. The other thing that we need to do is check for any movement motor-wise, side to side. I'm holding the right hand crank with my right hand and the left hand with my left, and I'm just moving it side to side. There is a tiny little bit of movement there. Okay, obviously we need to make a note of that, but it's nothing to worry about, I won't assume. So the other thing that we need to look at is these bearing pivots here. So if we put our finger between the frame and the bearing housing, and we rock the frame backwards and forwards, and we'll be able to feel through our finger if there's any particular movement between those two surfaces, and those actually feel quite strong. Okay, double check the bolts on this side, the crank bolts, just to make sure they're still tight. We don't want these crank arms falling off mid-ride. Do the other side. Okay. Now what the other thing that we need to do, besides just checking for movement between these, is just double check the torque settings on these particular pivot points here. Okay, so we get a torque wrench, so you can actually see that there's a measurement of torque written on these particular bolts. So it's important that we double check that they're actually at the correct torque. They feel quite tight, but we will need to check them as well. The other thing is obviously checking bolts like this on the seat clamp. The other thing that we need to do is make sure that the charging port is still watertight, and that fits nicely in there, so we're not going to get any water in there. We're also double checking to make sure that the lock ring is actually nice and tight as well. On the front chain ring, that needs to be checked to make sure it's nice and tight. The can tend to come loose, not so much on Shimano's, but on Bosch they can actually work their way loose as well, so it's worth checking those. So we'll just come to the top end of the bike and we'll double check these bolts as well. They do have a torque setting that says 8 Newton meters on there. I don't know whether you can actually see that. Okay, so it's worth getting a torque wrench and just double checking that they're actually 8 Newton meters. Now 8 Newton meters isn't a lot, but it's important that we need to check it. Okay, they just needed tightening up just slightly. Do the same with the bottom clamp. That's it. Okay, we know that they're right. We'll double check the front ones, the bar clamp, just to make sure that they're just nipped up as well. There is a torque setting on theirs. They're 6 Newton meters, so you'll need to double check them as well with your torque wrench. Drop down to the front end of the bike, double check the maxle that goes through the front just to make sure that that's actually still tight. Double check the spokes just to make sure that there's a decent amount of tension on there. You'll feel them. If they are slack, you will know straight away that one of them or a few of them may be not as tight as the others. If they are and you don't feel competent about tweaking them up, then take them to your local bike shop and they'll do it for you. The next thing to check is the bolts that fasten the caliper onto the fork. Just double check those just to still make sure that they're still tight as they should be. Don't over tighten them. If you over tighten them, you'll split the little conical washers on the top here. I don't know whether you can see those. So don't over tighten them. They don't need to be silly tight. Just you will feel how tight they need to be. That's it. So there's nothing wrong with them. They're fine. The maxle's okay. We've checked that. So this brings us on to the back end of the bike. Again, we've double checked the axle just to make sure that that's tight in the frame. But a quick look at the spokes just to make sure they're still tight. If they're not, you can tweak them up just a little bit at a time if you feel competent about doing it. If not, just take it to your local bike shop and they'll do it for you for a small fee, I'm sure. So that's nice and true. Nothing wrong with that at all. The brake bolts we've tightened, we've made sure they're right, so that's fine. So this brings us on to the changing of this particular chain. Now, if you remember when we measured it, it actually measured 0.75 on a chain tool, which is a little bit too far than actually I'd like it to be, particularly on an e-bike, because there's loads of power going through it, and you will find that if you leave it too long and you just replace the chain, any sort of power that you put through this, it will start to jump over the top of this particular cassette at the back. Now, Shimano have been kind enough to make available the bottom 3 or 4 cogs on this 12-speed Shimano cassette. It's a microspline one, and so you can actually buy them, but they are really scarce at the moment and you will struggle to find some. So it's important that you're on an e-bike in particular, you change your chain just after 0.50 on your chain checking tool. If you do that and you measure your chain right when you put it on, then you shouldn't have a problem. It's skipping over the back 3 cogs. Also, what you sometimes get is, if you leave it too long again, you let it go past 0.75, on the front ring, you'll get what we call suck up. Now, when the power goes through the motor and back into the chain, then the chain clings on to the front ring because the shape is slightly different. We've got a hook and it keeps hold of the chain and it sucks it up. And in worst cases, it sucks it right up the back of the chain ring, and it'll damage your frame. So it's important for a few different reasons that we change the chain at the right time. You let it go too long and you're having to replace the cassette, the chain and the front ring, and potentially the jockey wheels on your derailleur as well. So it's important you should get around about 2 or 3 chains without having to change any other component on the back end, providing that you catch it early. So what we need to do is, this is a genuine Shimano chain. It's a new bike, it's a year old, and so it's important that we try and use genuine parts because it could or may affect the warranty. So I'm going to use a Shimano HG SLX chain on this bike. So first of all, let's take this one all off. There we are. So we get us a lovely little Shimano chain tool. This is a brilliant little tool, this. One of the best tools I've ever bought. It saves you so much faff. So we're just trying to find the link. It'll be there somewhere and you will see it because it looks different to every other link in your chain. There it is. And we just use this chain tool just to unclip that. Keep hold of it. Split it. Now it's important that we keep this old chain and links, because if we find that when we put a new chain on and it starts skipping and jumping, you keep your chain and you put your old chain back on, particularly if you don't have any other parts to replace this cassette and front ring with. At least that gives you a chance to order these parts before you put your new chain back on. So keep them to one side. Okay, and we've got this brand new Shimano chain. It's a one-way chain, so it's important that the writing of the on the side of the chain is actually facing you when you put it on. Okay, so we just drop that over there and just feed it through, pull it off the bottom. Okay, leave it dangling at the front, wrap it around on the bottom cog, pull the derailleur out so you can get to the chain, pull it down, feed it through the derailleur, through the cage, out the bottom and round the other side. Okay. Now, when you're putting a new chain on your bike, do not measure your new chain off your old one, because it's stretched and it'll give you a different length to the one that you need. When you're putting a new chain on your bike, all you're after is to create a little bit of tension on this derailleur here, so it makes your chain tighter at the bottom. So don't bother getting loads of calculations and working out the best chain length for your bike. Get your new chain, wrap it round, okay, and this derailleur here needs to be just about there, more or less horizontal to the actual bottom chainstay here, and that's the position that you're trying to create. That will give the chain enough tightness on the bottom not to actually swing down. But when you're changing gear and you're right up on this 12th cog on the top there, then the derailleur is not going to be right round there, okay, too stretched. Okay, what you're after basically is as much wraparound on these cogs as you can possibly get. And the only way of achieving that basically is to make sure that your derailleur is in the right position to your cassette. On 12 speeds there's a little line on the back and you can set that with the biggest cog on your cassette, if you have a look at the back and you use the adjustment screw there to do that. But this particular chain needs to be just at the right length, just to take up the slack. Okay, and you can see that's just about right. Okay, so we put this split link in. Again, you may need a tool to split the chain so you actually get it in the right place. So we'll put this new link in. There's an arrow, if you can see it. Don't know whether you can see that. There's an arrow on it. Okay, so it's a one-way link, and it's the arrow goes in the direction of the travel of the chain. So your arrow needs to be pointing backwards. So we'll just clip that in there, nice and snug, give it a wiggle, and then get us lovely chain tool, wherever I've put it. Here it is. Okay, and we just clip that. That's it, and you can hear it go in. So now that you can see we've not got the clutch system on either, it's better not to have the clutch system on when you're doing this. So you can see that that is actually just taking the slack out of the chain. Any further up and you won't have any spring left on your derailleur, if that makes sense. So now when we're shifting right up to the high end, you can see that the derailleur is not really stretched, it's not out there, it's at the right position for that particular gear. And then we go back down into a higher gear, there, then the chain is actually at the right level, at the right sort of tension to get the maximum amount of wraparound on the cassette. It seems complicated, but once you try and understand how the system works, then it does actually make sense. And that's the best way of measuring your chain. Get it on your bike and do it that way. That way you can't go wrong. Just don't cut it short. It's always best, if you're unsure, cut it a little bit longer than what you think, and then you can always go back and cut some more links off. But that is what you're after, is just the amount of tension on that derailleur, just to keep your chain nice and tight at the bottom in the smallest cog on the cassette, and if you've got a double ring or a triple ring on the front, at the smallest ring on the front as well. The same applies to any bike, whether it's an e-bike, mountain bike, road bikes, the same kind of procedure, the same kind of setup as what you're looking for on any bike when it comes to putting new chains on bikes. So that's that. What we need to do now, okay, everything feels all right there, but what we need to do now is we need to take it out for a bez, just to see, make sure it's behaving itself, and we've got no skipping or jumping gears. I don't think we will have, but I'd like to have changed it a little bit earlier, this chain, if I could. So let's see how we go. So I've just been for a bit of a bez on this bike, and I love this sunshine on the morning. It's really kind of cool in your face. It's fairly fresh, but it's lovely sunny at the minute. So, and we're wonderful because we've got some lovely little trails round and about here, even though we kind of centre sobriety, so some like little ginnels and things like that, really steep, and there's a lovely little cobbled little steep hill at the side. It goes right to the top. It's quite steep when it gets to the top, and it's a good test for e-bikes. Get it in turbo, get yourself up to the top. This bike runs really nice. We've managed to catch the chain in time, so we've put a new chain on there. Everything's running as it should do, even on the smallest cogs on the cassette. So I'm happy with that. I'm glad that we've actually caught it in time, and it's just a chain that we needed. But one thing that I have discovered while I was riding this bike was a really nasty rattle, so annoying, and it sounds as though it's actually coming from down below. So I thought we need to just take a look at that and just see where it's coming from, because if I've noticed it, then obviously customer's going to notice it as well. And it's going to be something simple. It's kind of a plastic rattle, but let's have a closer look. In fact, if I get you down at the bottom, this is the area that it's coming from down here. Now there's a plastic cover that covers the battery, but if I touch it and tap it, you can hear that says rattle. Now I've looked closely and I've found, if I can get you in, you can see that there, but you can see there's a little fixing nut missing off of there. There's one at the top, you can see it at the top there, but the one at the bottom's missing, and that's why it's rattling. So what we need to do is we need to either contact Bianchi to replace that, or we need to califudge something together so we can actually get a bolt on there that will actually hold that in its place until we can order a new one. So that leaves one thing left to do on this bike, and that's just to connect it up to Shimano's eTube project, the software that Shimano provide us for diagnosing errors and issues with e-bikes and adjustments and things. We can see that there's an update there for the firmware for the motor, so we'll go ahead and update that. We'll double check to make sure that there's no errors in there. We'll have a look at the error log. There's likely to be one or two, and there is. Fairly simple ones, straightforward ones. We can just go ahead and delete those and reset. Nothing to worry about there. And we just need to wait for it to update. That's all done now. We'll disconnect it. Job's a good one. There we go, another little video from the Yorkshire Bike Mechanic. A first service and a diagnostic on a Bianchi t-tronik, if that's what you want to call it, or Bianchi, however you want to pronounce it. I had a quick ride on this bike. I did actually like it. It rode really, really well. No issues at all. So there you go, all done and dusted. If you've got any questions, got any comments, please leave them below. Thanks for subscribing. I hope you enjoyed that. A toodle pip.